Hey folks, let's discuss the natal moon square Mars today. So what we like to do in these videos is to begin by covering some astrological ground first. So what we do is to look at the archetypal relationship that is conditioning this aspect. So we know that the moon governs Cancer and Mars governs the sign of Aries. So in looking at first the archetypal relationship, we first go to the zodiac, that mandala that has all of the relationships. It contains within it all of the archetypal relationships that are essential to astrology. So we get our appreciation of aspects from the zodiac itself. Yes? And we know that the moon governs Cancer, and we know that Mars governs Aries, and Aries and Cancer are 90 degrees apart in the zodiac. So any aspect between the moon and Mars is archetypally square, meaning that there is an archetypal tension between the moon and Mars. And we can think about this. I mean, the moon wants to, establish a tribe. It is where we kind of connect to family. Yes, we establish a tribe belonging to some kind of kin, some kind of family structure or relationship. Yeah. But then Mars wants to establish its own independent identity. Mars wants to establish its own independent identity of sorts there. So we can think about this just laying the foundation there in terms of the archetypal relationship between the moon and Mars and what the inherent tensions are in any moon-Mars aspect in the chart. Now, as it turns out today, we are discussing the moon square Mars. So, we have a sort of double emphasis there on the tensions inherent in this aspect. The archetypal tension, Aries 90 degrees away from Cancer there. And also we are looking now at the moon square Mars, an aspect of tension. Yes? Now, any moon-Mars aspect, right, speaks to someone who has a strong awareness of personal desires, what they want. It speaks to a strong awareness of what you want, your own agenda, what you want to pursue, but also strong needs for action and doing as a means of establishing psychological equilibrium. So the moon describes the central conditions that we need to fulfill in order for us to feel a sense of psychological equilibrium, feeling okay within ourselves. That's what the moon is about, feeling a sense of inner comfort. So that's what the moon tries to do for us. So any moon-Mars aspect will tend to have that tone. So what does the square imply now? So firstly, we said we raised the idea of tensions between where I belong, what tribe I belong to, and my need to establish an independent identity of my own making. So that is often a kind of theme there with the moon square Mars. It's interesting to think about this in two ways. Now, with squares, we have opening squares, yes, which tend to have a Cancerian subtone. Okay, so opening squares, where the faster moving planet is 90 degrees away, it's traveled 90 degrees away from the slower moving planet. Those squares tend to have a sort of Cancerian subtone to them, in keeping with the fact that Cancer is the first 90 degrees away from the Aries 0 point in the zodiac. So we have those opening squares. Now, if we have a moon-Mars opening square, it tends to infuse this with a sort of inhibition. Yeah, so we want to look at where the person is sort of out of touch or repressing the Mars function, repressing their anger, or being kind of out of touch with how to express that properly. So with Cancerian squares, opening squares, we tend to see where there is either an inhibition, or because there is inhibition, it means that the resulting emotional expression becomes kind of inappropriate or volatile. So with that kind of Cancerian opening square there, we could find that someone with the moon square Mars is not so comfortable with expressing their anger, and because of that fundamental discomfort, the anger now comes out in these volatile emotional outbursts. So the person now has to work to establish a healthy rapport with the Mars part of themselves. They need to work. That's the square. Squares, speak to where we have to work. So the Moon Mars square, where that person has to work to now establish a healthy relationship with the Mars part of themselves, a healthy way of expressing the anger, of being in touch with their Mars. Yes? So there's that. And we can also find with that kind of person that perhaps in the home environment, that's the Moon, the formative childhood environment, that's the Moon, that the person for some reason or the other had to, let's say, suppress their anger, or, the home conditions, the growing up conditions, the formative childhood environment made it so that they had to either repress or internalize their anger. So that's also part of the narrative, or can be part of the Moon square Mars narrative, that the person had to sort of repress or suppress rather their anger, and the home environment produced that psychological mechanism, the need for them to be suppressing their anger and thus being out of touch with it, or then when expressing anger, doing it in a way that is extremely volatile or problematic. Then we have closing squares. Yes, so Capricorn is the archetypal sort of closing square. So we look at it this way, Capricorn being the final 90 degrees away now from the Aries 0 point. So opening square Cancer, first 90 degrees. Now, the closing 90 degrees in the zodiac from the Aries 0 point is Capricorn. So closing squares in whatever signs in the natal chart where the faster moving planet is now 270 degrees away from the slower moving planet, these tend to have a Capricornian quality. What does that mean? That there is a need for achievement or a cognizance of failure. So for example, now Moon square Mars, the person has a strong need for doing, Moon for doing an activity that is sort of fundamentally rooted in a need for achievement and a being afraid of failure. So I'm on the go, I'm a go-getter because I am afraid to fail, or because I have a need to achieve, to tangibly, concretely achieve something, a felt internal pressure to achieve, and thus the person is constantly on the move. So we have these two tones there, and the second tone there, the Capricornian tone there, being bound up with states of fear of failure. That's kind of what we see, or the need for tangible achievement. So we're seeing now how that Moon square Mars picture is fitting into that. But in general, a Moon square Mars, Moon describing how the person is reacting and responding. So Moon square Mars person reacting impatiently, reacting decisively, that kind of thing. So we're seeing Mars coming out in the way that the person is responding, the dominant reaction and response across the board to any sort of stimuli in the environment. Psychological stimuli, physical stimuli, the tendency reacting and responding impatiently, decisively, strong needs for action and doing. The need for action, doing, novelty. Also, the need for autonomy. So Moon square Mars, the need for autonomy, but the square can be problematic in that the need for autonomy can result in this sort of problematic let's say, problematic interactions with others, that the person has such a high degree of, a high need for autonomy, a strong need for autonomy, that they are stepping on other people's toes. They are kind of unaware of other people, unaware of how their actions, their need for autonomy and assertiveness is impacting other people. So the Moon square Mars person is either too aggressive, too insistent on their personal agendas and their need for autonomy in a way that becomes harmful to other people or even harmful to themselves. The need to just be going and to pursue their own agenda sometimes actually is harmful to themselves and also to other people. So that's the kind of too much tone of the square. Excessive needs for autonomy, independence, assertion that can be problematic. But the other thing with squares is the kind of too little dynamic where the person is out of touch with their assertive function. So they are resisting, the square being an aspect that shows where two psychological functions are resisting each other. The person is resisting their Mars side. So they are out of touch with it. So they're actually not assertive enough, not respecting their needs for autonomy enough, not allowing their psychological equilibrium to be reached through Mars, the need for autonomy and decisiveness. So they're actually out of touch with their Mars function in a way that can be equally problematic as the person who is over kind of excessive in their use of their Mars. So we have this too much, too little dynamic there with the squares. Of course, you have to do your own sort of self-reflection to assess whether or not that holds true for you. Which one holds true for you? Do I tend to be excessive, sometimes insisting on my own personal agenda to my own detriment sometimes, or to the detriment of other people? Or am I resisting the Mars function? I am out of touch with my needs for autonomy. I am not decisive enough. I am afraid of my Mars, even though I need Mars to feel a sense of psychological equilibrium. Now, whatever planet the moon is in aspect to, it means that the moon, the psychological function of the moon, the need for emotional security, the need for, finding a means of psychic equilibrium, whatever planet the moon is in aspect to, means that that planet is central, a central facet of how we establish security, comfort, and a general sense of emotional equilibrium. So the moon square Mars person needs Mars, fundamentally needs Mars to feel okay within themselves. Now, what kind of relationship does the person have with that Mars? The aspect can help us to get some clues there about that. The square can help us to get some clues about the extent or the how the person is relating to Mars, how the individual is relating to the Mars function within them, Mars being the faculty of self-assertion there. So we can find that moon square Mars person can react with volatility, emotional outbursts in a way that can be problematic, either because the Mars function is just on overdrive, or because they are inhibiting Mars, they're repressing the Mars, and then when it comes out, they're suppressing Mars, and then when Mars comes out, it comes out in a way that is just quite volatile. So we have that, anger being directed inward. We have that Mars being turned inward. So the person now is internalizing their anger in a way that's problematic. When it comes out, that you have that volatility there, and that being quite challenging for not just the person, but others with whom they interact. So that is what the tones of moon square Mars are. In general, too, we have qualities of emotional straightforwardness and directness, telling it like it is. So I feel a certain way, I'm going to let you know in a straightforward, direct, assertive way what I'm feeling. The qualities of emotional directness, we can see that with any moon Mars aspect, but the moon square Mars aspect will alert us to how that quality of emotional directness can be sometimes problematic or challenging. Or on the other side of the spectrum, we can see where the person again is not being emotionally upfront enough or emotionally straightforward enough, because there is that internalizing of feelings, internalizing of that Mars function. So the person is not actually being emotionally upfront because they might be afraid to do that if the Moon Mars interchange there is one of inhibition or being inhibited. That's the kind of thing we want to look out for as well when the moon is square Mars. Of course, we also are aware of the potential for family conflict showing up in the person's life experience, or the formative childhood environment, that formative experience being bound up with volatile states, an angry household, or volatility within the household that would have been conditioning the person's early life experience there. Family conflict or volatility within the home environment as well. That is also quite characteristic there of moon square Mars, and then how that dynamic would have been conditioning or impacting the person later on in life. Going back to the idea of work, now on the evolutionary level, the moon square Mars shows us where the evolutionary task is the work that's required to develop qualities of courage, or the work that's required to develop the qualities of self-assertion, like we said. So moon square Mars, what evolutionary task do we have? We have to work to develop those qualities and to sort of, let's say, do the initial sort of heavy lifting to incorporate those qualities into our psyche: courage, decisiveness. Now, we also see that with the moon square Mars, there is often a need for physical activity as a way of releasing psychic tension or releasing psychic energy. So the need for physical activity as a way of psychic release, psychic or energetic release. That's the kind of tone there of the moon square Mars. All right, folks, hope this was helpful. I do have a 2-hour downloadable class on aspects, which really drills into the core logic of aspects. We're not just describing them, but we're penetrating into the core inner logic, why aspects function the way that they do. So that is a 2-hour downloadable class available on my website. So I'll link that in the description box below. Until next time, folks, talk soon. Bye.